are a mental case, you 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 are mental, you are a mental case, 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 you are mental. Possibly, we don't know till we talk about it.
Nope.
You might not be mental, and you might be a little bit mental. We don't know till we talk about it, so let's talk about it now on the podcast. Let's talk about it now.
Hello, Charlie.
Hello there.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. I'm very well. I'm very well indeed. Are my levels all right? That's the first question I need to ask you.
Yeah, you're fine. I've got headphones on, so...
Yeah, I can hear you. You seem to have a decent microphone going on there. A lot of people I speak to are... it's quite tinny and I sort of have to do a lot of cleanup, but I think...
Okay. I mean, I do have an actual mic if you want, but if the sound's okay like this, then...
No, I think it sounds pretty good.
Stick with it.
I think it sounds pretty good. Welcome to the Mental Case podcast. This week's episode, I am very excited to say that I'm joined by comedy star, actor, writer, director, and author, Charlie Higson. Thank you, Charlie, for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And don't worry, the excitement will very quickly wear off.
Yeah, no. I'll be starstruck for what, up to 60 seconds, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you'll be thinking, how did I ever get into this?
How can I wind this interview up very quickly? Where do we find you, Charlie? Whereabouts? What's the background I can see behind you?
I'm in London, in North London, in Tufnell Park, in my office I have at home, as I spend most of my time writing. I've always had a home office. So I was one of those really annoying people who wasn't overly affected by the first lockdown because my commute was up here to my room upstairs. So
yeah, it's tricky to get on board with all the terrible stories, and people say it's been a pain, isn't it? Well, not so much for me. I've gone upstairs.
Not for me,
again.
but I've got three boys who are all in my 20s, and it obviously really hit them hard, and it's them that I feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for myself.
No, well, one of your boys, and this will be so from the top. This is a mental health podcast, but it's a meandering conversation which probably touches upon mental health occasionally when it comes up, and outside of that, whatever pops into my brain, I'll probably just say out loud. So if any of it is offensive, please don't take offense. You talked about your boys.
Don't worry, I'll simply tell you to fuck off.
Thank you, Charlie. You talked about your boys there. One of your boys is in a band called Koala, who I recently have started listening to. I saw an interview with you and you mentioned them. So I thought, I'll give these a very, very good stuff. But it was their pivotal year, wasn't it? Unfortunately, last year. Yeah,
2020 was things were really taking off for them. They had their own UK tour. They had a big support tour in Europe. They were going to do all the summer festivals. They were going to do Glastonbury for the first time. And like so many bands, well, like every band, the year was wiped out for them on that side. And as we know, playing live is now the main way that bands make their living and can make their kind of impact. So it was really tough on them. But as everyone else did, they were kind of forced to do more on social media and online gigs and things like that. Although, let's face it, we all got a little bit sick by the end of the year of watching the likes of the Rolling Stones in their living room play songs together.
And the palatial homes. And
yes. And so when things opened up this year, they did several festivals in the summer, and they just said it was so exciting, and the audience was so up for being there in a community setting, listening to music together. That whole communal thing of doing a gig, and he said it was just wonderful to get back into it.
No, that's good. I've listened to some of the stuff, and you can hear why they're going to be the next big thing. It's just a shame for these guys who were close to it. Before this, as we always do on these things, me and Charlie actually spoke before we started recording. So there was a brief conversation there. And Charlie asked me about my background in this. So really, my background in this is I wasn't a podcaster before I started doing this, but a big passion of mine has been talking about mental health, normalizing the conversations around mental health, and making sure that if you came on with a cast on your arm, I would probably talk about that and ask you about it, but I wouldn't necessarily know if your head was all right today and how you're feeling without asking you. And we're Brits, we find that tricky and all the rest of it. So I'll delve into it. But I guess the opening question I tend to ask a lot of people is, how is your mental health today?
Today, it's pretty good. And it's been pretty good for a few years now. You know, we all of us have, as my generation might have put it, our little ups and downs. And I was quite interested because I was reading it was an article in The Guardian the other day with a guy who's written lots of books about psychotherapy and mental health. And him saying that essentially we're all somewhere on a spectrum. And he said that happiness can be viewed as a type of mental illness. Mm-hmm. It's somewhere on the spectrum of from happy to sad. And I think it's quite normal for people to, you feel stressed, you get depressed about things. Other occasions you get elated, you can get confused, you can get lost. And as you say, it's very good to be able to talk about that in an open way without it being a scary thing, and for people to think, oh, this guy's mad, as we might have called it in the olden days, because we all feel those things.
Yeah, and I guess you've seen, and this is not a comment on your age in any way, Charlie, but you will have seen the landscape change quite considerably.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say I'd seen the end of the Second World War.
Yeah, you obviously saw the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and
yes.
You've been
there.
No,
you're right. I mean, things have changed hugely in my lifetime, but I'm because I'm of that's, I suppose, for want of a better term, stiff upper lip generation. I do slightly feel that that sometimes having a stiff upper lip can help.
Yes. Explore that a bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a tendency now for everybody to think, okay, I need to see a therapist once a week or whatever. I need to delve into these things. And as far as I can see, that perhaps the over exploration of that it doesn't seem to have made people any happier. Now, obviously, you can say, well, in the past, they were bottling it up. But there is that theory, if you pretend to be happy for long enough and behave as if you are, you just might find out that you do start to become happy. I mean, this is the problem. I have friends who suffer very, very badly with depression, and you can see, that is a terrible problem, and it's so hard to help someone with depression. It feeds on itself, and it turns you in on yourself, and it excludes other people, and it's very, very hard to cope with. But while most of us will occasionally get into situations like that, most of the time we're not. And it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I was doing a radio program. It was a comedy thing, and there were 3 young comedians on it. And they were bright, good-looking, successful young people working a radio show. And one day in the green room started talking about therapy. And one of these girls had 3 therapists. And she was saying how one of her therapists said she really can't she wanted 4. She wanted a different type of therapist. And he was saying, you can't take any, you've got enough. It's not right. And then the second of the actors started talking about her therapist. And as a joke, I turned to the third one, this young black guy, very funny guy, seemed to be totally switched. So how's your therapist? How many of you? He said, yeah, no, he's very good actually. And I see him. I think, what it's become that thing that you have to have a therapist. There didn't seem to be any particular need for these, and in the course of the conversation, it seemed to be that no matter how many therapists each of them had, the therapists were saying the same thing to all of them. And they were saying, you need to think about yourself a little bit more. And I sort of felt, perhaps we don't need to think about ourselves quite so much. We're in a very this world where everything is about the individual and about thinking about yourself and your place in the world and how other people think of you, which is forced on us slightly through social media that we all engage with. And that actually getting out of yourself is perhaps might be more useful than constantly thinking about yourself and picking over things.
Yeah, no, I there's a huge part of me that I understand what you're saying there in terms of introspection and navel gazing and potentially dwelling on things too much could exacerbate the problem to a certain extent. I have had therapy. I don't currently have therapy, but there have been times where I would think I would need it. And equally, because I like to talk openly about this, I do have medication for depression, only low level, but it's something that's there, to sort of the chemical side of things. And I think it will affect people to a different level. But I certainly, I think it's not about getting better as such as just trying to, I think some people who maybe wouldn't have therapy may have a better support network as well in their life, potentially. I don't know, friends, family who they feel they can talk to about this stuff quite openly. But it is an interesting thing, like you say. I think it's certainly a generational shift. And I have 3 children who are 5, 2.5, and 2.5. I have twins as well, so that's always interesting. But they, I'm sure by their age, I think the landscape in school will change. I think the conversations will change from a very early age, and I think the whole thing will go through a myriad of, iterations. Really, by the time we get to, I'll say, what's this? At 6 they'll come back and they'll delve into all sorts. But I'm not sure what the answer is. But it's good. No,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I am not in any way anti-therapy, and I think that idea is, if you feel you need one, then as you were saying, take one on to help you through that situation. But there's this idea that we should all be in therapy, or that the American idea that we should all be on medication of some sort or other. That being said, probably most of the people my age I know are taking some form of not necessarily antidepressant or whatever, but things to help on that side of things. And yes, my own kids had they went through stages of being quite anxious about stuff as kids, and finding the right therapy for them to help them through that, which one of them had, was really useful. I think if you get rid of all the kinks with your 3 therapists, what are you going to be funny about? Because comedy comes from that place of being destabilized in many ways, and having these itches that you want to scratch.
No, I that's really interesting. And I think there's something else that just popped into my head there. You talk about your children and going through some of this stuff. As a role model, as a father, you are a successful writer, producer, comedy actor. You've done all this stuff in your life that, and no disrespect to my parents, but I didn't have that as a something to say, oh, blimey, that's what you could achieve. So to all intents and purposes, I look at someone like yourself and go, there is a confident individual who knows what he wants. I guess my question is, do you think that would have had any effect on your children growing up and their aspirations and their drive?
I can't say, and I don't know what they think about me. I mean, I think giving children a stable home and as stable an upbringing as possible is definitely beneficial. Whether it helps having I'm not sure necessarily particularly does help if you have a sort of, and I don't, I don't consider myself a kind of overachieving, super successful, whatever. But yes, I have been successful, and I know that can be quite difficult for kids sometimes. Of thinking, well, how do I make my mark? Where do I go in the world that will separate me from just being in my father's footsteps or whatever, or my mother's footsteps? So that side of it, I think, can, I think the stability is more important than the sort of being a successful role model, because happiness is not down to making vast amounts of money and whatever. It's being content in yourself. But it was really interesting, seeing the anxieties and the problems and the fears that young people can have, and trying to work out how you steer them through that, because it doesn't really help to keep saying, well, you'll get over it, and you look back and you think, what was I so worried about? And it's like when a young person is having problems with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and weeping constantly, you have to say, well, for God's sake, move on. It's not like you're married with kids where you got some real problems if things go wrong. But you can't do that. It's not helpful to say, oh, get a life, get some perspective, because you don't as a kid, and that's the problem, and why you can get worked up about things and concerned about things. And it's very interesting that kids do pick up on, even if it's not overt, if there are problems going on with their parents, illness in the family or tension of things, that even if you try and protect the kids from that, they're very sensitive. Their radar is very sensitive, and their antennae, and they pick up it. And you can sometimes think at the time, what I don't understand where this is coming from. And then you look back and think, all right, this was going on in my life, or whatever. And that has kind of fed into the kids. So it's a fascinating thing. But I'm glad that my boys have negotiated that and seem to be fairly content now. And actually, the thing in all three of their cases that really helped them was getting girlfriends. And that comes down to what you touched on earlier. They have someone to talk to. They have someone to share things with who understands them, and for want of a better way of describing it, that is a form of therapy.
And I think that understanding is really important. It's really interesting you talk about already at 5 years old with my daughter. I recognized that I thought I was keeping quite a good lid on a bit of sadness I had the other day, but clearly not, because I sat there, you sad? I said, no, I'm very good. And I'd put a brave face on, and she then put a song on that I particularly like on, found it on YouTube for me as a
that is
I know.
She's really switched on there.
Yeah, she then called the Samaritans and said, I think you want to talk to these guys. And I said, hang on. It's not
she arranged 3 therapists for you and some comedians to come around.
Exactly. And by that point, I was fixed. But and sorry to start on quite a serious note, because the whole point is with this podcast.
Well, it's a fairly serious podcast, isn't it?
Well, no, actually, right. Let me change the tone, because no, it's not, Charlie. The way I deal with most of any issues I've ever had in inverted commas is to laugh through it and try and be funny and have that sort of, and comedy is a huge factor. So, this is the reason, Joe Lyson's been on this podcast. We've had Nick Helm, and we hopefully some more comedians down the line. Whoever really, because I tune into those sort of people, I guess, and see, like you say, there's an aspect of looking at the world that you can. When I realized I was quite different from not my parents but friends, where they said, "Why is that funny? Why is the Fast Show funny?" And I still don't know to this day why it's. I grew up on the Fast Show. I was, what was that, 1994 to 97, 98. So I was about 11. No, I was 9 when I watched the first episode, which when you look back at some of the content, probably I was a bit too young to be watching it and talking about it the next day, as I was with things like the League of Gentlemen, all that sort of stuff. But I think it helped to shape, my approach to comedy, what I think is funny, what you can laugh at, what, that's a taboo subject. You can't laugh at that. No, you can. And I guess from the Fast Show perspective, one of the questions that, because I put it out to people on Twitter, but I'd already had this thought to ask you about it. So Johnny Nice Painter as a character, still great sketches, and they're all up on YouTube. Anyone can watch these now. But from a modern day perspective, how do you think that would land from a mental health point of view?
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, he is obviously someone with very deep mental health problems, which his wife is well aware of, and she's obviously the only person who can contain it, and she's his carer in many ways.
Played so brilliant. They played so brilliantly as well. It's such a
Arabella was. I think that's almost my favourite thing of hers that she did on the farce. And it's great in a double act to have that, trust in each other. And
for the listeners who have never seen this sketch, could you just describe what Johnny Nice Painter was? He
was. It's funny because the character came from two different areas. I like to paint, and I've always been fascinated by the sort of Sunday afternoon painter types that you'd see in like harbours in Cornwall, painting watercolours of the yachts, the boats in the water, or a nice little landscape, or a vase of flowers, or some cats or something. And I had the idea. I thought, wouldn't it be funny if we had one of these painters? But he had the soul of a tortured artist, like Van Gogh or whatever, and that he really, felt that his art was this great, deep, passionate, important thing when he was doing a watercolor of a tree, and I wasn't quite sure where to take it, and completely independently, we had this great writer on the Far Show, a guy called Brendan O'Casey, who simply sent some scripts into us one day. He's quite an eccentric guy. He's a great guy, and he was living on a farm down in Devon at the time, and he would send us these sketches that nobody else could have written. They were beautifully written, and but odd. And he independently had this idea. He was obsessed with a guy called, I think he's called Alwyn Crawshaw, who actually used to make videos of how to paint that you'd find in craft shops, and his description of the character was exactly the same as my description. The sailing hat, the glasses, the beard, the
There's
smock.
so many elements that are so.
There are thousands of these guys out there, and he had the same idea, and he just had this idea that he was triggered by the word black, and it unlocked this kind of deep despair and madness. But what made it interesting was that Brendan wrote these beautiful poetic lines that he would spout when he got into this state, which I couldn't have written. And I thought, okay, we've both had this idea independently. It's got to be a good idea. So I put together what I'd been working on with what he'd been working on. And I think it's the poetry that Johnny comes out with, I think, that takes it away from being just let's laugh at a madman. Sorry, I just turned my phone off.
No, it's fine.
And also, you see, what we did on the Far Show, and I think it's one of the reasons the Far Show was, people did take it to their hearts, and why they still do like it, is we came from a position of having sympathy for all our characters. It wasn't, let's laugh at this idiot, let's be nasty about this idiot. Even the awful ones, people like Colin Hunt and Swiss Tony, it was trying to find what is the humanity behind them, what might be the problems that have led to them being there. So one always has sympathy for Johnny, and particularly for Katie, his wife, and it used to be great fun doing those things, trying to make Ari crack, because
you could tell you're trying to do that. There's the one with the pies. I have pies for eyes.
Well, that's the one time she cracked, because that's the one time I actually came up with a line on the spot, which hadn't been written by Brendan, because we had these two pork pies, and it suddenly came into my mind, my eyes. My eyes are pies and yours are lies. And because it wasn't scripted and we hadn't rehearsed it, that really did take her by surprise. And that's the one time you could see her start to smile. But she would always just dip her head down into her chest.
Johnny.
And she was genuinely flinching because the bits we didn't rehearse was me going mad and throwing things around and smashing things up. She never knew if I was going to hit her with something. But I made sure if I ever did, it was only with like a flexible canvas or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But as I say, I think it is the fact that we feel sympathy for them and their relationship. And
you're not laughing at, and I think I would say, I don't know, because I can't go back and talk to my 9-10-year-old self, but I would think I probably didn't see the nuance in that when I was that age. I probably was just laughing at you shouting black and drawing over and throwing the canvas. When I rewatch them as an adult, which I do, I go back to comedy from that era quite frequently because it's just got a really, it's got a good place in my heart. And there's an element of melancholy to it. Certainly, I do feel sorry for Colin Hunt because he's just trying to get on with people. There's no, he's just trying to make friends.
He's a guy who doesn't know how to do it, And this is what it can lead some people to become incel or but those kind of things where you find a group on, I found my family. He's someone who he doesn't know the how socializing works, and we all have elements of that. I mean, I'm very shy, and I really struggled with things when I was younger. And but still, people like that do get mocked, and and laughed at, rather than but they haven't chosen to be inept socially. They just haven't learned how to do it. And again, Colin, like probably most of the characters on, all of us, let's face it, are somewhere on a spectrum of one sort or another.
And I think maybe I was listening to a podcast, one of the many podcasts I listened to, and someone was being interviewed about, and they weren't sure if they would have written that at the age they were now. I think they were sort of 50, and they said because there was an element of not bullying, but it could have potentially led to people like that, but being bullied in real life. And they said, I don't think I would have written the same character. It's not to say it wasn't funny, but they would have had a lot more sympathy. And it would have been a much nicer and much more rounded off at the edges. And I think, because how old were you when you were making the Fast Show?
Well, again, I think another of the reasons why it perhaps has stood the test of time is Paul and I were both in our mid-30s.
Yeah.
So now most comedy sketch shows are things are probably done by people 10 years younger, and perhaps not as empathetic, should we say? And we always pushed that. I mean, Colin gets bullied, but we feel sympathy for Colin when he's bullied, and the bullies we're not really on their side. We tried that. Not all the characters you can give depth to. The Suit You Tailors were simply two people in a shop who insulted people that came in, and we tried to think, could we ever take them out of the shop? So we said, well, not really, because that's all they do. They had no inner lives. We couldn't think of them. Whereas Ted and Ralph, there is so much, because that is about relationships. It's about all of us struggling to communicate with other people, and most of us not being very good at it.
It's fantastic. And the sketch where you have to tell him that his wife's dead. And by the way, I love that sketch, but I was waiting for the punchline, but it's such a long build-up, but it's such a great build-up, and it really makes you work for it, which I think we've lost a bit of that. I think everyone wants to cut to the chase too quickly now, and I am going to really sound old now, but with TikTok and, having to get your point across in 3 seconds, I'm like, well, maybe time is the...
There's a bit of that. I mean, I think, people will watch TikTok, but they will also happily sit down and watch some 7-minute American sketch on YouTube or something.
No, you are right.
So, I think that can be overstated. I think there's a time and a place for everything. And, we worked very carefully, in the Fast Show in terms of pacing when we're putting the shows together, in terms of what sketches go next to which, and you know how it develops over a series and things like that. So a lot of work was put into that, so that hopefully you didn't feel there were any longers.
No, yeah, no, absolutely not. So you mentioned there, Charlie, being a bit shy when you were younger. How did that manifest itself, other than probably not talking much?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You didn't talk. Okay, that was shyness. Let me get the dictionary.
You know, awkwardness and fearfulness in social situations where you don't know people. You're put into unusual situations. But you know, I think one of the things of shyness, it sort of pushes you in on yourself a little bit. You know, I read a lot, and you know, I did have close friends, but you sort of, I think when you're shy, you can sort of get into little sort of cliques, and to other people, it can look a bit sort of arrogant, standoffish, like you don't want to join in with what they're doing. It's funny because, you know, Paul Whitehouse, who I've known for nearly 40 years now, you know, he's the opposite of shy. You know, he's a complete extrovert, and he does not understand shyness. And you know, he just basically just keeps saying, "You're just rude, Charlie, and you've made up an excuse for it with this mental condition of being shy." But it is, and if you're not shy, it's something you can't understand. It's quite interesting because Bob Mortimer has written his autobiography. It's just come out. It's a brilliant book, and he talks a lot in there about his own shyness. And I've been doing some events with him to promote the book and talking about this, and it is fascinating. And you know, it slightly meant that when he got together with Jim Moyle, with Vic Reeves, they were this tight little group, and Bob was sort of strong within that. And as an outsider, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was coming from shyness and being driven by shyness. And you know, shyness, if you use it, it can be very creative, because you know you're observing quite a lot without necessarily participating too much, because as soon as you start participating, you cease to be able to observe things objectively. So you know, I think with all these things, with all the sort of mental quirks and emotional character quirks that we all have, you know, I think that's an important thing of how society works and how mankind works. You know, there must be genetic reasons. You know, we need people with autism, we need shy people, we need schizophrenics, people with bipolar. It's part of, it's all aspects of humanity, and different things come out of all that when the different characters bump up against it. You know, a lot of creative people have had bipolar, and in a manic phase they can achieve huge amounts. You know, I think the hardest thing and the most difficult one is what we were talking about earlier. You know, extreme depression just doesn't ever seem to lead anywhere other than down, which, and it's an awful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think you made a really interesting point about how that shy, because I was quite shy as a child as well. I've certainly gained confidence as I got older, but I think that led to smaller, cliquey groups of friends where we would become obsessive about. And I don't see that as a bad thing. Obsession can often be, you know, tinged with negativity, but actually I think being obsessive about cult comedy, or really getting into something, rewatching the same episodes, maybe, you know, 4 times that week when you've taped them on VHS, on long play, so I can get double tape length. I'm not an idiot. You know, so spending that time just rewatching this stuff and really seeing what was happening, I think that was, you know, others would say, "Oh no, I saw that film." I was like, "Oh yeah, have you've seen it again since?" No, I wouldn't rewatch it. I've seen it, and I can't. For me, that's incredible, because I'm this, you know, and we've all, I'm sure, hopefully I'm speaking to a similar sort of person that might have a film they've watched, you know, 30, 40 times, and it's that thing that you go back to. So when I watch something, when I listen to a podcast, when I'm invested in it, I probably, to the point of blocking the real world out a bit too much sometimes, you know, living vicariously through comedy or films or whatever that might be.
Talk about comedy. Something I was thinking earlier, and you know, saying how important comedy is as a way of coping and dealing with things and getting holding the darkness at bay. Do you think, in a way, that comedy is a form of stiff upper lip?
I think there's an element of it. I know that it's the tears of a clown sort of thing is the cliche, isn't it? But I know when I came out to say, look, yeah, I do have depression, I have anxiety, I've been on medication. A lot of very close friends said, like, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you can't be. You're always laughing. You're always making jokes. You're always at the party. I am, but that's not to say. So I would say that it's an overused thing to say defense mechanism, but it is a total. I'd rather be in this place making jokes, finding the funny in the most harrowing of situations than have to deal with the reality of what's actually happening at any point. Because if I actually tune into what the reality of life is, I don't really want to think about that too much. So I'll just continue to make jokes.
But what is the reality of life? I mean, it's not an absolute, is it?
No, I know.
And when you're laughing, the reality of life is, well, it's a bit of funny.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think,
and it is a thing with depression. Exactly what you're saying is, to an outsider, it's irrational. You're saying, well, why are you depressed? Because depression is not caused by. I mean, it can be, but it's not always caused by something terrible happening to someone or things going wrong. It's just something somewhere goes wrong. But I have friends who've had extraordinary, awful things happen to them. And, on paper, you'd think their lives is just a disaster and they must be absolutely depressed, but they're not perfectly cheerful. Got on with things. They say, oh, yeah, that was a bit of a problem. And other people, rich, successful, good relationship, and they suffer terribly from depression. And that's why it's hard to help someone through it, to help bring them out of it. I mean, obviously, talking helps. And
I feel like there's a comedy there.
If you can use something like comedy as a distraction, just for even if it's just for half an hour, you stop thinking about yourself and you come out of yourself and just engage a little bit. And although showing Norman Wisdom films to someone who's heavily depressed is perhaps not the best therapy.
No, that wasn't. I don't think that's subscribed on the NHS.
You've frozen on me again.
Oh, sorry. Am I back?
Very thoughtful look.
Am I back now?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, sorry. I did hear all of that. I did laugh at the Normal Wisdom comment. No, that's I'll leave all that in. There's very little editing that goes into this podcast, and I'm honest, Charlie. No, exactly. It's not the solution, but it's certainly I would always steer people in the direction of comedy. I am constantly saying, watch this, you should watch this. It's and again, that sort of more cult sort of comedy, the stuff that's really so richly written that you can rewatch and just take yourself outside of being in there for a little bit, which is not a bad place to be, and sharing that laughter with someone else. It always in times if I've been stressed or depressed, luckily I have a fantastic wife, and sometimes you think, I don't want to burden her with this, but every time you open up and talk about it, it helps. And often, that can lead to laughing about something. And that is always beneficial. It's interesting you talk about the word burden there, because that is the thing that I suffer from quite heavily, which is, I'm sorry to talk about this. And before I even finish the sentence, I'm saying sorry. And they're like, just talk, for other people, that's fine. So it's a common trope that even those people that we know implicitly want to hear what we've got to say and trust us, still we feel that we're impacting on them, and that's not what a partnership is all about. So, and
also, I mean, one thing I've really learned through that is you don't need to keep trying to give people advice. They're not necessarily seeking advice. What they're seeking is just someone who will listen to what they're saying and will take it seriously and take it on board. And you don't have to keep thinking, well, how can I help? What do I do? What do I say? Maybe if you did this, you don't want that. And often people can resent that, thinking, well, why are you telling me to do this? That's not going to help me. So it is that idea of saying, God, yes, that sounds awful. That must be terrible. It's hard to deal with. And tell me more about it.
Yes. Properly listening to someone and not having to solutionize all the time it's
Yes.
a tricky place to get to, but once you get there, I think it can be really helpful. You talked about being young and shy, and obviously writing Young Bond and writing The Enemy and all these books that are probably, they are read by a younger readership, some of them. So do you give any thought to the impact that you're having on today's youth, Charlie?
Well, in the sense that, I think reading is a fantastic thing to do, and you cannot deny that people are reading less and less. There are so many other distractions. I mean, reading books, obviously, one reads stuff online all the time, and I think it's a shame. And even with my own boys, they hardly read, and I've got so much from books, and it was one of the impetus for me to write books for kids. The young James Bond books, are read probably equally by boys and girls, but it was I did, having 3 boys of my own, it was obviously a large part of my mind of thinking I want to write some books that boys are going to want to read and are going to enjoy, and to think, actually, reading is fun. I want to read some more. So that was a big drive, and it's always very heartwarming and encouraging when you get feedback from a kid or from a parent or a teacher saying, this kid would never read, but I gave them one of your books, or I found one of your books and I really enjoyed it, and now I read a lot. That is a fantastic feeling, and that's why I carried on writing for kids even after my kids were sort of growing up. And actually, the Enemy series that I wrote after the Young Bond, it is about teenagers, and it's about teenagers coping with incredible stress and terrible things happening in their lives. And I tried to make them as emotionally diverse as I could on whatever spectrums these characters were on. And I have found that quite a lot of teenagers who said they'd find it quite difficult to read books say that something about the way I write, they find it very easy to relate to the characters and to get inside it, and a lot of them have said it's really helped them through hard times and terrible anxiety. And maybe just writing about something genuinely really, really awful happening is a way of gaining some perspective on what might be happening in their lives. And there's a lot in the books about why these kids in the books have survived where others haven't, and I guess that might be helpful to kids reading it in terms of thinking about their own problems and survival strategies and how to deal with all this stuff. But it's definitely a thing where if you're so busy having to deal with all this other stuff, and it goes back to where we started, in a way it's kind of like I don't have to deal with the difficult domestic stuff and the intense emotional intimate stuff. It's like why a lot of men like war. A lot of men soldiers, looking back, I mean, a lot of them are incredibly stressed and had awful times. Looking back at the Second World War, said they liked it because they were in this. They had the camaraderie of the other guys they were with. They had a purpose. They were told what to do, and they weren't at home having to deal with those everyday problems. Which it's like an excuse. I can't deal with that. I've got to go and fight Germans.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I can't talk to you about your anxiety. I've got to go and polish my bayonet. So
yes, exactly. It's kind of I've got to go and do this, and I think men do like that a lot. That thing of, there's all this discussion about should men have more maternity leave. Most men I know, when they have kids, cannot wait to get out of the house, go back to work, so they can have a break from it. Because the hard stuff to deal with is that day-to-day family life, relationships, whether it's with partners, parents, kids, whatever, and looking after things and coping with things and making sure everything's covered and the bills are paid and the leaking gutter's fixed. It's so much easier to go out and someone say, right, you've got to march up that hill and shoot those people over there.
There's no way to view that really. There's no way to go, what angle shall I approach this? Well, point that direction and fire. I mean, I know absolutely. That's a really good point. And I was about to say that's the real life stuff, but it's all real life. But it's just it's the stuff that I guess you don't get. There's no way to train for that. Is that when you first have kids, and obviously your children are older now, and I'm right in the thick of the dealing with the the emotions that come with being a 5-year-old and also then having twins thrown into the mix and thinking, blimey, how do I navigate this? You could read all the books on it, but I think my way of dealing with that sort of side of life is just do it and make sure you're there for them, and I'm sure you
learn your own way of doing it. But it's funny, you do get trained to be a soldier. You don't get trained to be a parent.
No.
Or a husband.
No.
Maybe we should have proper military training. National service
and ranks.
Yes, you've achieved. You are now a major.
You're a brigadier husband.
You're allowed to be in charge of 3 children now.
But that does sometimes feel that there is zero training for it. But I think. You just try.
Well, every parent has that same experience. When you have your first baby in the hospital, and they have all these sort of vast medical support around you, and it's amazing. And there's always problems, but they're fixed, or whatever. And that day where they say, right, you can take the kid home, and you've got it in the carrying basket. You think, are you insane?
You're letting me take this?
Giving me a human being? Oh God, look, I've got a clue what to do.
What are you doing?
And the rest of one's life is like that. No matter how many self-help books you read or parenting books or classes that you go to, nothing can prepare you for actual real life. But I've hoped that over the years, I have helped people by making them laugh or writing a book they'd like to read.
Definitely. And just for me, I could say thank you very much for making me laugh when I was in those troubling years of adolescence. So it certainly helped me and continue to do so. So I'm going to ask you a closed question to what I hopefully will get an open answer to, which is, do you feel that when you're writing for a younger audience, it stops you from writing something that you would have written? Do I
edit it for kids? Do you mean, as it were?
Not so much editing, but does it put a bit of a constraint on the creative process? I guess the freedom to write for adults, you go anywhere, but do you find you sometimes sit within a framework?
I much prefer to write within a framework anyway. Ultimate freedom in writing is absolutely useless. It's no good to anyone. There've been occasions over the years, particularly back in the 90s. Doing a far show and stuff that film producers, film directors would approach us and say, we only want to make a deal and make a film with you guys. And we'd say, well, we haven't really got an idea for a film at the moment. They say, it doesn't matter, we'll do the deal and it'll be great. We'll make a movie. If you say, but without an idea, where do you start? And we weren't thinking in that direction. So, I've always loved the constraints and the restraints you get in writing. If you're writing a sketch show, because Paul and I were also producing the Fast Show, so we had to deal with budget and how much it was going to cost. And so
how many more canvases can we throw across a field before it's going to cost us some money?
Exactly, those are all considerations. And what locations are we going to go to? Where can we do this? And then the thing would shape and form into what is achievable and what you can do. And I like that. And that's why I wanted to do a sitcom, which I did with the Swiss Tony character, because I had always loved that discipline of, you've got 4 or 5 characters, you've got 2 sets, and most of what happens has got to happen within that framework, and it's going to be shot in a studio with 6 cameras, and I loved that, and I really enjoyed that. So there have always been restraints on what I write, and there always are, and no one wants to read someone just their mind just rambling all over the place. Genre fiction I've always loved, and the thing about writing for kids is you've got to keep them entertained. You can't think, it might take them 50 pages to really get into this book. No, if you've got 1 page to get them into a book, and they'll make their mind up very quickly. So you're constantly having to think about, how do I keep driving this forward? What can I make happen here that's going to make them keep interested and keep wanting to read without it feeling manipulative or, just things happening for the sake of waking them up. But and then there are other restraints. The language you use. You can't make the language too adult. I didn't write about sex in my books. There are quite a lot of YA books that do deal with that, but that's really for younger writers to write and for people who are closer to that age. I didn't want to put that in. I was happy not to. And I think in some ways it was kids quite like to think, not constantly have to think about that side of things and their status of things and where they are with the opposite sex. Again, it's there's a zombie series where kids are trying to survive against marauding adults who are trying to eat them. That goes back to being a soldier in the Second World War. You just got to get on and deal with that threat and survive and work our way through it. And there are relationships in there, and we deal with that side of things, but not overly done. So no, I love writing for kids. That being said, I've just finished a new crime book for adults, which will be out in beginning of 2022, and it was quite fun to go back and actually think I can write whatever I like here in terms of adult themes. So I hope I haven't just splurged too much of that onto the page. All the things I couldn't write about when I was writing for kids.
We will find out when the reviews come in 2022. What's the title of the book, Charlie?
It's called, quite apposite in terms of this discussion, it's called Whatever Gets You Through the Night.
Okay. And can you give us a brief summation, a synopsis?
It's about a guy who helps people who got problems, and he mainly is employed to get people out of tricky situations. And he goes to Corfu to get back the teenage daughter of this guy and she's essentially sort of been taken into a cult. And as we know with things like that, there's often a sort of sexual element to that. So he's trying to spring this girl, and it's a character piece, really. It's all the different characters that he deals with and that the girl deals with, and it sounds quite dark, and there are dark elements to it, but it's also I used to love Elmore Leonard when he was at his height, and he would essentially just think up some great characters and rub them up against each other.
Well, I think it sounds really interesting. I think when you talk about whether it be comedy, your new book, and Young Bond and the Enemy series, it's all really, for me, falls under escapism and being able to go, it's not, you're not writing about somewhere just down the road and the local shop and, like you say, relationships in that sort of way. Of course, it's part of the fabric, but it's not, basically just turning a mirror on people's usual day-to-day
total
existence.
escapism. And the great thing about the Enemy books being a horror series is horror is a fantastic genre for teenagers, because you can deal with a lot of quite heavy issues, like death, disease, change, aging, paranoia.
Sorry, I didn't know. Were we talking about COVID now?
Well, it is about a disease that only affects the older people, but all those things, but it deals about them through the filter of fantasy, of horror. We're not going to be attacked by zombies or vampires or COVID. But so it's a way of doing that through entertainment and escapism, but it means that those issues are brought up and discussed and thought about. So I think, and again, even my young Bond books, again, through their escapist adventure stories. But there are, for want of a better phrase, moral messages or whatever within that, which the kids can absorb without necessarily being aware of it, and not feeling like they're being lectured.
Well, I think it's a very good thing. This is not a question, more of a statement that comedy heritage and a comedy mind such as yourself is writing for the younger generation in that way, because it just gives that different voice to it, and not as po-faced as perhaps maybe some of this stuff could be.
Well, the other thing is that earlier this year in May 21, I had a kids book out, which actually had been delayed by a whole year because of COVID. Because in 2020 the kids weren't at school and they weren't having summer holidays, and the book is called Worst Holiday Ever. It's about a kid going on a summer holiday, and that's about a really shy boy. It was kind of based on what I was like at that age, but it is a comedy book, and it was quite interesting with the publishers. We were discussing it when we were talking about the PR and the marketing campaign. They're saying, well, it's great because we can tap into all these things about anxiety in kids and shyness and coping with social situations and problems, and we can really push it on that front. I said, well, yes, but can't we just say it's a funny book? Aren't kids more likely to read it if it's a funny book? But all that stuff is there as well. But there is this big push now with everybody, and particularly with publishers, about sort of issue-based things and about kids' anxiety. And it's great that this is being thought about and being written about, but you don't want it to get to such a state where all kids are thinking, what's wrong with me? I'm not anxious.
Yeah. The absence of an issue then becomes the issue.
Yeah.
It's a circle that will never end, isn't it? That sort of thing. So, well, I know you've got other commitments coming up, Charlie. Thank you so much for giving me your time. It's been really good, and everybody who I've spoken to and popped out messages that I'm going to be talking to you is very excited, and so I said, "Oh, blimey, how did you get that? How did you manage to talk to him?" I said, "Because he's a nice guy and he doesn't mind giving up his time." So thank you so much for that.
Well, as I say, I can only be a huge disappointment to them all.
No, not at all. It's been really good, and I think we've covered loads of really good bits. Like I say, it's not so much. There's mental health stuff that I want to talk about, but really, it's my biggest thing, and it's probably not. I wish I'd been funnier, because it'd be nice to make you laugh more. But and my only other ask, Charlie, is if you can just get in touch with Paul Whitehouse and Bob Mortimer as well, and just say, can you go and do this podcast? That'd be great.
They get a lot of requests, and I'm constantly passing them on. Paul has just reopened in Only Fools and Horses, so he's quite distracted on that, and Bob is something of a recluse, but yes. I will mention it, sir.
No.
It's the best I can do.
No. It's I'm just trying to build up all these. Essentially, if I could have nothing but comedians on here and those sort of minds, that would be all I really want. So no, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much, Charlie. And the podcast will be out in a couple of weeks, so I will send you a link.
Well, it's been interesting to talk about this stuff.
Cheers.
And sorry I didn't do more jokes.
No, we're now both going to go away and be anxious about this for the rest of the day. I wish have been funnier. No, brilliant. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks so much.
Yes. Good luck with it.
Bye.
You are a mental case. 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 You are mental. You are a mental case. 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 You are mental. Possibly. We don't know till we talk about it. Nope.